The lake glimmered like liquid glass under the golden afternoon sun, a vast, tranquil mirror reflecting an endless sky streaked with soft white clouds. The air carried that crisp, almost intoxicating scent of pine, damp earth, and wildflowers that only a secluded lakeside could offer. Every inhale reminded me why I'd bought this place: peace, privacy, and the chance to escape the noise and chaos of the city. I parked my truck near the narrow gravel path that led down to my dock, stepping out with Duke bounding excitedly beside me. His brown and white coat flashed in the light as he tore ahead, barking at a family of ducks swimming lazily near the edge of the water. "Easy, boy," I called, laughing as he splashed a paw into the shallows, sending ripples across the clear surface. It had been a long, exhausting year, filled with endless deadlines, flights, and boardroom battles. I'd spent nearly 12 months searching for this perfect spot, hidden from the road, bordered by tall evergreens, and with a dock that reached out just far enough into the lake to feel like my own private paradise. I'd signed the papers quietly, through a real estate attorney, never once interacting with the so-called community board. Honestly, I hadn't even known there was one. With my cooler in one hand and a folding chair in the other, I headed down to the dock. The old planks creaked under my boots, weathered from decades of summer heat and winter ice but sturdy enough to hold a truck if needed. I set my chair near the edge, let the cooler drop with a soft thud, and took a moment to just breathe in the stillness. It was quiet, birds chirping in the trees, the soft lapping of water against the shore, Duke panting happily as he flopped onto the dock beside me. Exactly what I'd been craving. That peace lasted maybe 5 minutes. "You there?" The sharp, commanding voice cut through the stillness like a knife, startling Duke to his feet with a low growl. I turned slowly, already bracing myself for whatever intrusion was about to ruin my perfect afternoon. There she was, marching toward me from the direction of the gravel lot like she owned the place. Mid-50s, maybe early 60s, with platinum blonde hair that had clearly been treated by the most expensive salon in town. Oversized sunglasses covered half her face, and in her hands she carried a thick, leather-bound binder, stuffed with neatly organized papers and color-coded tabs. The outfit, pressed white blouse, capri pants, perfectly polished loafers, screamed suburban royalty. "I'm talking to you," she said again, heels clicking against the wooden planks as she advanced down the dock. "You can't just set up here." I raised an eyebrow, not moving from my chair. "And why's that?" "Because," she said, with the kind of smugness that only comes from years of unquestioned authority, "this dock is for members of the Lakeview WA only. And I don't recognize you. Which means you don't belong here." Duke barked once, sensing my irritation, but I gave him a quiet command to sit before leaning back casually. "Pretty sure I don't need permission to sit on my own dock." She froze mid-step, head tilting slightly like I'd just spoken in another language. "Your dock?" "Yep," I said evenly, taking a sip from my water bottle. "Bought this property a few months back. Thought I'd come up this weekend to finally enjoy it." The woman's lips curled, part disbelief, part offense. "Sweetheart," she said in a tone that made my teeth clench, "nothing around this lake is truly private. The WA manages everything: the docks, the shoreline, the trails. If you want to live here, you need to join. And to join, you need to fill out these forms, pay the initiation fee, $500, non-refundable. And agree to our rules." She flipped open the binder with a practiced flick of her manicured nails and began rattling off her list of rules as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "No fishing before 7 a.m. No motorized boats unless approved and tagged by the WA. No pets off leash. No loud music. No exterior lights past 9 p.m. And absolutely no alterations to the shoreline without written permission from the board." My jaw dropped slightly. "You're kidding." Her head snapped up. "Do I look like I'm kidding?" "No," I said slowly, still stunned at her audacity. "You look like you've turned a perfectly good lake into a prison camp." Color rose to her cheeks. "We keep this community safe and orderly," she said sharply. "We've spent years building harmony here, and I will not let some outsider waltz in and disrupt it because he thinks the rules don't apply to him." I set my water down and stood, facing her fully now. "Listen, Karen." Her eyes widened behind her sunglasses. "Excuse me." I nodded toward the shiny gold pin on her blouse that read, "Karen Whitmore, WA President." "It's literally on your badge," I said dryly. Her face flushed bright red, a mix of embarrassment and fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she snapped. "This WA is the backbone of this community. You think you can just show up here, do whatever you want, and ignore the rules everyone else follows. Not happening. Either you sign the paperwork today or what? I cut in, my voice calm but firm. Her nostrils flared as she clutched her binder tighter. Or I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Your attitude is exactly why we have these regulations in place, to keep troublemakers like you from ruining what we've built here. I stared at her for a long moment, fighting the urge to laugh in her face. Call whoever you want, I said finally, dropping back into my chair and leaning back with an exaggerated yawn. I'm not signing anything, and I'm not paying your ridiculous fees. Have a nice day. For a second, she just stood there, frozen in shock that someone had dared to tell her no. Then, like a kettle finally boiling over, she spun on her heel and stomped up the dock, heels clacking furiously against the wood. This isn't over, she shouted over her shoulder, already pulling her phone out of her designer handbag. I'm calling 911 right now. You're going to regret this. I watched her storm off, the sound of her shrill voice echoing down the quiet shoreline as she launched into some fabricated emergency about a suspicious man trespassing near the lake. Duke looked up at me, ears perked and head tilted like he, too, couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. I reached down, scratching behind his ears with a low chuckle. Well, buddy, I said, settling deeper into my chair as the sun dipped lower in the sky, looks like we just met the neighborhood welcoming committee. This should be fun. The minutes dragged on, every sound magnified by the stillness of the lake. Somewhere up the hill, I could faintly hear Karen's voice, sharp, panicked, and loud enough that even the birds had quieted in the trees. I didn't move, didn't panic, didn't even bother packing up my things. Because unlike her, I knew the truth. This dock, this shoreline, this land, all of it, belonged to me. And the second she realized that, this little game of hers was going to get very, very interesting. The sirens echoed faintly in the distance before the familiar hum of tires crunched against the gravel path that wound toward the lake. Duke lifted his head first, ears perking up as he let out a low growl. I sat still in my chair, my sunglasses shielding the calm but deliberate stare I fixed on the approaching patrol car. By the time the cruiser rolled into view, Karen was already standing near the entrance of my property, her arms flailing as she pointed dramatically toward the dock where I sat. From this distance, her shrill voice was muffled, but her exaggerated gestures, hands waving in frantic circles, fingers stabbing the air in my direction, painted the entire picture. I leaned back, resting my arms on the sides of my chair, my feet planted firmly on the weathered planks of the dock. If this woman thought she could intimidate me into bending to her absurd WA fantasy, she was in for a rude awakening. Two officers stepped out of the car, a younger guy, probably fresh out of the academy, and an older one with graying temples and the kind of posture that suggested he'd seen more than his share of neighborhood disputes. Karen wasted no time intercepting them, her voice suddenly crystal clear as she practically screeched, "That's him. Right there, the trespasser I told you about. He's refusing to leave private WA property and threatening to destroy our peaceful community." The younger cop frowned, clearly confused, while the older officer scanned the area with sharp, calculating eyes. His gaze lingered on the house, then the dock, then finally on me. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just took a slow sip from my bottle of water and whistled for Duke to sit by my side. "Sir," the older officer called out as they approached, mind standing up for a minute. I pushed myself to my feet, calm and deliberate. "Not a problem, officer," I said evenly, brushing off my jeans. "What seems to be the issue?" Karen stormed forward before either of them could respond, her sunglasses perched dramatically on top of her head now, revealing eyes blazing with righteous fury. "The issue," she snapped, "is that this man is trespassing on WA-controlled land. He's refusing to leave and he's being aggressive. I told him, very nicely, that he needs to sign the membership paperwork or vacate the premises, but he just sat there like some entitled squatter." The younger cop blinked, clearly unsure how to process that. The older one, however, kept his eyes on me. "Sir, do you live here?" "Yes," I said, pulling my wallet from my back pocket and flipping open my ID. "Name's James McAllister. Bought this property 3 months ago through Westwood Realty. The deed should be on file with the county." Karen snorted, crossing her arms. "That's impossible. I know every single property owner around this lake, and there's no James McAllister." "He's lying, officer. He probably forged papers or hacked some system online. I demand you remove him immediately. This is a private community. You can't just waltz in here and take what isn't yours." The older cop tilted his head, studying me for a moment before reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, run a quick check on the property at 187 Lakeshore Drive," he said into the mic. Karen's jaw dropped. "You don't need to check. I'm the HOA president. I know what I'm talking about." The cop ignored her. Moments later, the radio crackled with confirmation. "Property deed lists owner is James McAllister. Purchased April of this year. No liens, no disputes." The younger officer looked between us, eyebrows raised. Karen, meanwhile, went pale before her face flushed an even deeper shade of red. That can't be right," she sputtered. "There must be a mistake. He never came to any of the HOA meetings. He never filled out the membership forms. He can't just." I stepped forward, slowly, until I was standing just a few feet from her. "You seem confused, Karen," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through her hysteria. "I own this property, which means this dock, this shoreline, and this house. All mine. I don't answer to your HOA, and I sure as hell don't owe you a dime." The younger cop shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension, while the older officer just let out a slow exhale, watching Karen like he'd seen this 100 times before. Karen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's not how this works," she insisted. "Everyone here abides by the HOA's rules. Everyone pays their dues. You can't just exempt yourself because you think you're special." "Except," I said, letting the silence stretch for a beat, "I'm not just exempt, I'm your landlord." The words hung in the air like a firecracker about to go off. The officers glanced at each other, confused, but I kept my gaze locked on Karen, watching the exact moment the realization started to dawn in her widening eyes. "That's right," I continued, stepping closer. "This land, the entire west side of the lake, including the house you rent, the lot your precious HOA office sits on, and that little community pier you're so proud of. It's all part of my holdings. I let the management company handle the leases, so maybe you didn't bother to check who was cashing those rent checks every month. But now you know." Karen's jaw trembled as her righteous anger crumbled, replaced by a sputtering mix of confusion and disbelief. "No, that can't be." "It is," I cut in sharply. "So the next time you think about calling the cops on me for sitting on my own dock, maybe take a second to remember that your little HOA kingdom exists on my property." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the distant cry of a loon somewhere across the lake and the rhythmic lap of water against the dock. The older officer cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "seems like there's no crime here." "Sir, you're within your rights to be here. Ma'am, I'd recommend resolving this through conversation instead of, well," he let the words hang as his gaze flicked toward Karen, whose face was now an alarming shade of crimson. Karen looked like she might explode. Her manicured nails dug into the leather of her binder, and her eyes darted between me and the officers like she was calculating whether sheer indignation could somehow override legal ownership. This isn't over," she finally hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and upend everything we've built? You'll regret this. I'll take this to the board. We'll vote. We'll have you removed." I smiled, not a warm smile, but the kind that carried a silent warning. "Go ahead," I said, folding my arms over my chest. "Vote all you want. Just remember that I own every inch of ground you're standing on. Including the meeting room you hold those precious little gatherings in." Her mouth opened again, but no words came out this time. She snapped her binder shut with a sharp crack, turned on her heel, and stomped up the gravel path toward the main road, muttering under her breath about ungrateful newcomers and lawyers. The officers lingered for another moment, the younger one scratching the back of his neck awkwardly while the older one gave me a slight nod. "Sorry about the trouble," he said. "Some folks get a little carried away with their authority." I chuckled, giving Duke a quick pat on the head. "No harm done. Appreciate you coming out and handling it professionally." They climbed back into their cruiser and drove off, the sound of gravel crunching beneath their tires fading into the distance. I stood there for a long moment, staring out at the water as the sun dipped lower, painting the lake in hues of orange and pink. The quiet returned, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft splash of a fish breaking the surface. Somewhere near the dock, Duke settled beside me again, resting his head on his paws, his amber eyes fixed on the horizon. "Well, buddy," I murmured, a slow grin spreading across my face, "I think this summer just got a whole lot more interesting." In the days that followed, word spread like wildfire around the lake. Neighbors who had barely glanced at me before were suddenly stopping by, some with nervous smiles and others with sheepish apologies, offering pies, fresh-caught fish, and even invitations to barbecues. But not Karen. Karen kept her distance, though I caught her more than once glaring from across the water, her phone pressed to her ear as she gesticulated wildly during what I could only assume were frantic calls to her fellow board members. I didn't care. Let her stew. Let her plot. At the end of the day, the reality was simple. The lake, the land, the dock, they were mine. And no amount of posturing could ever change that.